the new me, the me that has been through the fires of the last 3 or 4 years, I find I always temper hope with scepticism and suspicion. But I quite enjoy it. I quite like the healthier awareness of both sides of every coin that has come my way. I read this week about what appears on the face of it to be a climb down by the high and mighty of the European Union, the EU. I'm a follower of an online magazine called The Daily Sceptic. Toby Young, Free Speech Union and all of that. It's his online output, and I pay close attention to it. And I was struck this week by a headline which read, "Winning!" ! Winning! EU drops net zero demands after farmers' protests. And it read, quote, "The EU has backed down on net zero targets for agriculture, including drastic cuts in fertiliser and pesticide use, and a recommendation that people eat less meat following widespread protests from farmers." Now, that sounds good. And I'm not just going to pour cold water on it by any stretch of the imagination. I think that sounds very good. And it has within it very good things, because apart from anything else, it reveals a shiver has run through the European Union, looking for a spine to run up. But this mention that I made earlier of healthy scepticism, we must be on guard, as frankly as never before. I mean, let's listen to them squeal, and the squealing is in there. Ursula von der Leyen, the politician and president of the European Commission, she's quoted in the piece saying, "Our farmers deserve to be listened to. I know they're worried about the future of agriculture and their future as farmers," which, that sounds good, and it sounds sane. But then notice in the second half of the quote, the truth that they always leave out for us to see. That their twisted ideology requires them to leave like low-hanging fruit so that they can't be accused subsequently of having not said what they really had in mind. And that second half of the quote reads, "But they also know," that's the farmers, "that agriculture needs to move to a more sustainable model of production so that their farms remain profitable in the years to come." Right, so that's the steel fist within the preceding velvet glove. And I would say that, following that quotation, you open brackets and say, we all have elections coming up. And if we don't want to have our snouts forcibly removed from the luxurious trough, we'd better wait for now, make some insincere noises about having listened to the protests of the people. And then, hopefully, once we're all re-elected, we can get back to business as usual, which is the business of re-establishing feudalism and putting the serfs back where they belong. Close brackets. These people, these bureaucrats, I say with all sincerity, look at the calibre of these people. Look from whence our so-called leaders come, or the leaders of the European Union at least. Ursula von der Leyen is president of the European Commission, right? That sets the direction for the whole body. And when she was put forward for the job, she's German. A poll in her homeland of Germany found that only a third thought she'd be good at the job. That's at home. A former president of the European Parliament, Martin Schulz, described her as, quote, "our weakest minister," and added, quote, that's apparently good enough to head the European Commission. That's scathing. Before Ursula von der Leyen quit from her old job, her previous job as defence minister in Germany, in 2019, she'd been connected to, dodgy procurement contracts, whereby consultancy firms were paid millions of euros for gear, for equipment that never arrived. And United States officials discovered that under her command, of the ministry, German troops had had to use their mobile phones to stay in touch with each other on manoeuvres because they had no encrypted radios that hadn't arrived under her bailiwick. And that on occasion, German troops had had to practice using broomsticks instead of guns. It's like Dad's army. But here we are in a world in which the likes of, and I'm not singling out von der Leyen. She's just there because she was the person quoted in that piece. But here we are in a world in which the likes of Ursula von der Leyen, they're deemed worthy. She's deemed the best choice for president of the European Commission. That's a serious job, hypothetically, if it matters. It is the body that directs the strategy of the European Union. It shapes policy. It drafts laws. And it looks after the budget. And it's got its hands on the purse strings. A person, you have to say, where do these people keep coming from? And why are they promoted to their positions? Always failing, but always falling upwards. Always get a better job, having failed in the job you had before. I mean, it's not even just the European Union. The French politician Christine Lagarde, she's another classic example of everything that's rotten. She's a former managing director of the International Monetary Fund. Good job, you'd have thought. And president. She's been president of the European Central Bank since 2019. The European Central Bank. But before that, she was convicted in a criminal court in 2016 of negligence for her behaviour in relation to 285 million euros that were paid out to a businessman friend of former French President Nicolas Sarkozy, who was a mentor of hers. And she might technically have been jailed for a year for what she did or didn't do. Or she might have been fined a fortune. But the French court decided to impose no punishment at all. And she just went on to get a better job. Now, how do these people find themselves in that rarefied climate where failure is the prerequisite for advancement? The whole European Union fish stinks. And fish, as we know, rot from the head. So politicians like Christine Lagarde and Ursula von der Leyen are the living embodiment of the Kakistocracy, which is government by the worst elements in a society. The lowest of the low, put at the top. By their fruits shall ye know them, as it says in the Bible. So for months, the European Union, the World Health Organization, the World Economic Forum, and others, and their supine lackeys in governments across Europe have waged war on their own farmers, right? And that behaviour alone ought to have exposed them for the anti-human zealots that they are, or the anti-human zealots that they serve in the manner of sock puppets. In pursuit of the suicidal, in fact, the downright murderous policies of net zero, those souls, the farmers tasked with providing the food the world eats, have been bullied and abused in a carefully and ruthlessly choreographed state effort to make farmers' lives impossible. Politicians and EU officials with no more hands-on experience of farming than I have set about ordering the culling of livestock and the banning of nitrogen fertilisers that alone, on their own, make it possible to feed 8 billion people on the planet at the one time. They've ordered the abandonment of farmland, allegedly to make way for the building of the super cities that the serfs will eventually be herded into, having left the land. You know that satellites are deployed to spy on farmers. Satellites, they're watching farmers from space. Every 3 days in the Netherlands, the satellites take pictures and zoom in on what the farmers or individual farmers are doing. And it's not just the Netherlands, it's the same tech is used elsewhere. And they can see what farmers, individual farmers, are doing at any given moment. So if somebody lights a bonfire without written permission from the EU, down come the fines. Or if they plant a crop, other than that specified, a decision having been taken on their behalf by bureaucrats, if they plant something else, well, the satellites will see it, and here they come again. The Eurocrats and bureaucrats, they demonstrably won't lift a finger to protect national borders. And think what a contribution to manning borders could be made by satellites in the English Channel. But you plant a bag of seeds they don't like the look of, and better watch yourself. And the trouble started in the Netherlands, which is a tiny scrap of a place, but thanks to the wisdom of its farmers, generation after generation of maintaining the land and understanding the land, enabled the Netherlands to become and to be the second biggest producer of fresh produce on the planet. Or that was the case until the desk jockeys embarked upon their ruinous interference. But those Dutch farmers fought back. They took their tractors onto the highways and byways and then into the cities to draw attention to their plight, spraying manure on council offices and so on. And the authorities immediately responded violently. In at least one case, live bullets were fired at a tractor driven by a teenage boy. Live bullets. But undaunted, and fired by the same spirit that kept the Canadian truckers going in the face of other lunacy by other lunatics, those Dutch farmers pushed ahead, and they have been, and still are, vilified by their own governments and by complicit mainstream media as far-right extremists. Far-right extremists? Farmers? What kind of world are we living in when it's far-right to do your best to try and feed the world? But that determination by the Dutch farmers spread like a fire, like a bushfire. It spread to Germany, to Italy, to Greece, to Belgium, to Lithuania, to Romania, to France, to Poland, to Ireland, to Scotland. And it's not just farmers, but it communicated to whole swathes of the populations of the countries in question. Because people like you and me, seeing the writing on the wall for their futures and the futures of their children and grandchildren, rose up in support of the farmers. Last year, because it's been going on for a long time, last year there was a landslide victory for a politician called Geert Wilders, who's the leader of the Dutch Party for Freedom. And his victory, his landslide came in elections that served really as a de facto referendum on the madness of the EU's obsession with net zero. And, make what you will of Geert Wilders. You say what you like about him. He is a controversial figure, but he represents a change in the wind, or support for him represents a change in the wind that the incumbents can feel and that terrifies the living daylights out of them. And anti-European Union political parties in Austria, in the Czech Republic, in France, in Belgium, in Italy, in Hungary, in Poland and in Slovakia are, according to polls, poised to win in the respective elections, in the European elections in June. And in addition to those, there are significant advances expected by so-called populist parties in another 9 EU states. Populist, that's a bad word now. Being of the people is a dirty word. It's a pejorative. So there's blood in the water. Let's be assured of that, reassured by that. There was an article in the British Daily Telegraph, right, the establishment rag, and it was quoted in the Daily Sceptic. It said that the farmers of Europe were, quote, holding the EU hostage and winning. And that language is interesting. Talk of hostages, it fits in with that extremist narrative. But I ask you. And so now we see the bureaucrats and the politicians, they're running for cover. And why? Why are they? And the answer to the question is crucial. Because I say don't for a minute accept any notion that the EU shysters are listening to the people in any meaningful sense, in any heartfelt sense. The scales having fallen from their eyes in a Damascene moment. Don't think that for a minute. And don't think for a minute either that it might be a good idea to swallow any of the bullshit mention of democracy that will inevitably flow either. Democracy is dying all over the West. The voice of the people, which is the heart of democracy, is being throttled by censorship and accusations of disinformation and misinformation and malinformation and online safety bills. If that's being throttled, then so is democracy. So I asked at the top where politicians like von der Leyen come from. And the answer is that they are selected precisely because they are what they are, which is incompetent. And I say again, this isn't just about Ursula von der Leyen. It's a general criticism. They're incompetent, they lack life skills, they are without an ounce of common sense. In any sane world, they are wholly unsuited to positions of authority, except in the eyes of those who put these clowns in those positions. It's the ineptitude of these people, their innate stupidity, and the ways in which they have previously demonstrated the likelihood they will have no option once in power but to do the bidding of those who put them there and hold sway over them. The whole house of cards is trembling, shaking, prior to falling, and in all manner of ways. Over the past few years, during the scamdemic, in the stirring up and financing of endless wars, revealed in the hoax of the climate crisis, driven by mainstream media propaganda and complicit scientists, the push to net zero, the greatest hoax and money-making scam imposed upon humanity so far. All of it is plain to see, and the hoaxers and their complicit politicians, bureaucrats, scientists and journalists know it's visible too. So I say again, watch them closely now. Endless and fulsome, I predict, will be the platitudes from on high about listening. We're listening. About the will of the people. About the dead parrot that is democracy. Winston Churchill, former Prime Minister of Great Britain, said democracy was the worst form of government apart from all the others. And if the last 3 or 4 years have taught us anything, it's that majorities, the mass of populations at any one moment, are never right. I say, never follow the herd unless you want to end up where every herd is headed, which is to say the slaughterhouse. Time and again we have seen that it is small, stubborn, self-taught and independently informed and educated minorities that make the difference, that kindle the fires. The protest against the war on farming, the war that the politicians are backing away from for now, was begun by farmers in one of the smallest countries, a minority if ever there was one. They were attacked from the start by their own politicians, by the European Union, and by any media that even bothered to pay them any attention. But that minority persevered, and its message spread, because it was the truth. A politician who has himself been vilified for years as a right-wing extremist, that's the aforementioned Geert Wilders, revealed the will of many Dutch people, including the will of some of the youngest voters in the country. So it's across generations. And now the protests all across Europe have frightened the Kakistocrats. But watch those duplicitous, utterly craven characters in the European Union. Watch them dissemble, watch them lie in hopes of holding on to power. It was so blatant. They've got elections coming up, so they changed their tune. How do they think we can't see them? But they do it to try and hold on to power. And it's the power that they think they can retain and that will enable them to usher in a new dark age of feudalism. They are frightened, but they're not done yet. So if we had to be watchful of them before they were wounded, we must pay even closer attention now. The game, as Sherlock Holmes says, is afoot. We're winning the game, but it ain't over yet.